with some of our regional operations. But if we can look and really see that some of that work can be done remotely, then now we can really, look for top talent just across the country. And that's been a really big game changer for our leadership team to recognize, hey, we can do this. And our leadership team was very traditional. They've wanted everybody in the office. So I think we've come a long way, but it really is because of our team members who have proven that if you give them some opportunities to be flexible, they're going to perform at their best.
Thanks. Anyone else like to tackle flexibility?
Sure.
Great.
Kristi, I love what you mentioned about the fact that we as a workforce and a community have proven that we can do it. I've worked at Hewlett Packard Enterprise now, but I've worked in other industries that were kind of a more traditional mindset. And there was always this idea, if we have Fridays off, or Fridays from home, are people going to really work? But we did it. So that's awesome. That's really, really great for everybody around the world. We should all pat ourselves on the back that we did it. We've proven it. But I love what you said, Kristi, about seeing that flexibility and proving it to the leadership. What we've done at Hewlett Packard Enterprise that I think other teams can maybe do as well is categorizing jobs according to what they do and whether they need to be in the office full-time or not. So what we did, and it works for us, is kind of a 3-tiered approach. So you've got your folks who, they're not near an HPE office, they never need to come in, they're fully remote. Then we have the folks who are in R&D, working with the supercomputers, they've got to be there in the office every day, they're in the office. Then we have this middle tier where the vast majority of our folks reside, which is, we call it the edge. You're working on the edge. So meaning that you can come in when you want or not. Or, if your personality is such that you like to be in, fall in that category, that you come into the office, you socialize, but you don't have a dedicated workspace. We go into the office in the morning, we log into an app and say, okay, I'm gonna take cubicle A5, whatever it is. You've got your docking station, you set up and do that. But for folks who prefer to work from home, that's really working for them, they have that option. So kind of that 3-tiered approach has really worked for us.
Oh, great, Matt.
I was to say, for the the new hire, we found it's really important for them to sort of get indoctrinated into the culture, right? In the first sort of 90 days, they have to kind of understand and experience the culture. So it'd be ideal if they could come in the office just to experience what happens, how people talk, how decisions are made. And I will tell you, COVID has really pushed this whole flexibility model. We came out with a hybrid work model. People were like, why are you telling me what to do? I've just been able to be successful. But I think the thing that also was really important is for us to understand is a large part of our workforce is in operations, and they're still in the office. And so all of our office workers are thinking they're determining how everybody's supposed to work, and the operations folks are like, well, we've been here at the refinery this whole time. And so it's a real understanding for all of our office workers, need to know what it's like to work in operations and out in the field, and those people out in the field to know, like, hey, sometimes there has to be some, remote possibilities where people are always working off-site, but we still need to get them into the culture, because that's the way we want to help them make decisions.
Lisa?
Yeah, I love that sort of perspective taking that you're having, to do, considering that you have so many different kinds of roles within your company. I would say one of the things that we've focused on more to allow flexibility was not so much, it wasn't so much about the hours that you were working, but your OKRs and your goals. So as managers and leaders at AMP, we've really zeroed in on those team OKRs, making sure that their objectives and key results are in line with the company's larger objectives. And so at the end of the day, whether you worked 6 hours and you had to take a couple of hours off because you had a migraine or you had a kid to pick up, or whatever your need was, if you achieved the goal, it didn't really matter whether it took you 6 hours or 8 hours. And I certainly hope it didn't take you 10 hours, because that's too much work, especially in this environment. And that's been a real just learning thing for us at AMP, that we kind of threw out the window thinking about time, and let's just focus on the goals, and actually helping the team establish the goals, because they weren't always good at sussing that out themselves.
Fine. Clelia, would you like to address that flexibility balance?
Yeah, for us has been a little bit related to what Matt mentioned, and is as leaders first starting by understanding what is the reality and the nature of our business. We try to provide a lot of flexibility, but we came up at a certain point with certain agreements of what we call core hours, meaning there are certain hours of the day that even if you're in a support function and you can do it from home, you're supposed to be available, because I'm still HR, and if there is somebody in the field who have a question, I need to be there. I'm a finance person who have to approve a ticket or a PO. We need to be there at certain hours. So I think having that communion between flexibility, but still keeping in mind community, the rest of my colleagues, there are people depending on me to run another process. And I think that's the key for us, keeping that balance.
Let's talk about leadership, managers. How can they model this behavior, which is to strike that balance? I mean, managers got to where they are because they're maybe competitive or ambitious and so on, and they really want to show up and everything. So how do you teach them that they have to really show how to do this? And I think, Julie, you've thought about that.
Yeah, I mentioned this a bit at the top, but I think
Yeah.
to your point, modeling the right behaviors is critical, but maybe even going to the point of being really obvious about it, like putting on your out of office, I am taking my kid to whatever it is for 4 hours, and that you're going to be unavailable. Where, is that necessary? Potentially not, but it sends a really strong message to your employees that it's okay. I'm leaving during the day, I'm taking the time that I need, and I'm going to be gone. Or even putting it out of office and saying, I'm in Hawaii for a week, whatever it is, but showing that you're away, you're not available, and not answering emails that are not critical, and also not sending them. So, I mean, as a part of this panel, so you'll see I'm not an HR and OD person anymore. I had been in the past, but I'm working as a functional leader now, heading the data office. So I'm seeing it from kind of a different perspective, and I'm seeing how important modeling those behaviors is. And I heard some chuckles about not sending the email, but how often have you seen, maybe you're on vacation, whatever it is, you're away, it's after hours, and you receive a non-critical email from your manager? What does that tell you? I mean, I think we all get that reaction of, I've got to do something with it, whether I'm in Hawaii or it's after hours, whatever it is. So managers have really got to just pause and think. So I think for those of us who are in an HR and OD position, it's important to talk about that kind of experience, about what do your employees feel when they receive that kind of an email? And maybe even if you have to set a timer on your email so it doesn't arrive until 8:15 the next day. Whatever it is, those are so critical to help employees understand you don't have to be online all the time, because what's going to happen? Burnout. They're going to leave. The Great Resignation, as we all know, is very, very real right now. So the macro level initiatives that are coming down company-wide are important, but also those micro behaviors of what the managers do and model are critical.
Have any of you experienced this, where you yourselves, where I just have to get this thought out of my head and off my desk and dump it on this other person before the weekend?
Oh yeah, we've all done it.
Yeah, I will say I'm bad about that, but I've had to train my team, this is the time I work on the weekend, or this is the normal time I work in the evening. And if it's urgent, I will put urgent in the subject line, but know that that's my normal working time, right? And that actually helped my team and some of the support folks that I work with, because they got used to the cadence, right? And I've encouraged managers to do the same. Especially we're on meetings all day long. So sometimes for me, the only time to actually get real work done is maybe in the evenings or on a Sunday afternoon or something. And so, you can use those tools about sending late emails or whatever it may be, but I've really just had open dialogue with my team to say, just because I'm on doesn't mean you're on. And if there's something urgent that I need from you, I will text you, because, we're a 24/7 operation. But that's helped them a lot. And I've shared that with a lot of our senior leaders and encouraged them to do the same. And we coach about setting boundaries, as individuals and also as leaders, just about vacations and PTO in general. And I think once people truly understand what your rules are, they will try harder to respect those. I have a standing rule for the last 20 years that I don't work on Saturdays, because I work a lot during the week. And when I moved into the senior leadership role, some of the senior leaders I had to tell, hey, if it's not urgent, please don't call me on Saturdays because it's the one day off I get. And I had a couple of them, that's kind of funny. And then I was like, no, this is my day off, right? And then eventually they came to respect that. And then they would share with me, oh yeah, like I carve out an hour to go to the driving range in the mornings because I typically have calls till late in the evening. So I think even as you start to have dialogue about it, then people will also share with you kind of their best practices and their boundaries as well.
Very candid, thank you. On this end, anyone care to add?
Yeah, I just
Lisa,
agree that
Matt?
the dialogue is so essential, as well as something that you said, Matt, in that, that first onboarding experience, these are the things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about what the expectations are about communication and, the different styles. And, if we give them permission from the outset to be transparent, to be candid, and that we show that we're doing that, like the kind of broadcasting that you do. I mean, I'll often post, I'm taking 20 minutes to go walk my dog. I'll be back, because it just gives people permission. And then I'll post a picture of my dog. And of course that gets a lot of likes and everybody feels, a little dopamine release. It's a dog and a like, right?
I would say when you're on an international team, it actually takes on a whole nother significance in terms of thinking about timing and what am I sending that they're hearing at what point in time. We had a meeting this morning, and in California, the meeting started at 5 a.m. In Houston, it started at 7 a.m. London, it was 1 p.m. and Singapore, it was 9 p.m. at night. So who is going to pay, right? And I am willing to, or somebody will usually say, hey, look, I'm willing to actually sacrifice a little bit for this other time that I would be off or go exercise, or oftentimes the person in Singapore will actually, if we have an evening call, he will actually take the call from the park somewhere, which really sort of, I don't know if anybody's ever seen Priya Parker's video on the art of gathering, but one of the things she talks about is bringing some of the outside things in. Don't always live on mute, right? So we can kind of understand. So we really try to do that, and it's always nice to see something else besides an office. So anyway, just another way to think about. Obviously, it's a big world, and someone's going to have to pay some type of they're going to have a sacrifice of some type when you're a global team.
Probably best to distribute that sacrifice.
Yes,
as best
spread
you
the pain
can.
out.
Yeah,
It makes it a little bit easier.
Clelia, I'd like to go to you first in terms of staying in touch as management or managers with all the things that are going on in people's outside lives, and knowing how to counsel them on that. I understand you have created webinars and things like that about all kinds of home issues.
Yeah, so actually it stemmed from a different need, but it kind of funneled to webinars on helping support people at home. So it started out I was working in global IT at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We were hiring about 1,000 employees in the pandemic. So none of the employees had ever met each other. And now, almost 3 years later, they still haven't. So how do we bring employees in? Our offices were closed. We didn't have the luxury of having them come in and be indoctrinated in our culture. So how do we help them become a part of the HPE way without ever stepping foot in an HPE office? So I talked to some cool folks on the team. They told me about this really cool thing called Clubhouse. I don't know if anybody's used Clubhouse before. I had never seen it, but then I started listening to it, and it was so interesting because it was bringing people together. It reminded me of kind of the 90s chat rooms. Well, what Clubhouse is, you come into a room that has a particular topic area, and you hear the moderators speak, and other people can unmute and speak about a particular topic. And it was bringing people together all over the world to talk about this particular subject area. I thought, gosh, that's kind of fun, to try to mimic those conversations that you have on the way to the coffee pot, on the way to the car. We were trying to kind of come up with that idea. So we put together, we called it the break room, and we had different groups about things like, what are you binging right now on Netflix, to more serious topics about how are you dealing with the pandemic with your kids at home. and how you were dealing with an illness with a loved one. It really ran the gamut, and we had great participation in all of these different groups. They weren't mandatory. We tried to schedule it on a Friday afternoon, either in the morning or the afternoon in the US, so we could catch time zones because we have a large population in India and Ireland as well. So we had people coming together, developing relationships. People were starting to become indoctrinated on either really fun topics or much more serious topics, bonding together, but then also coming away with either a skill or a binge list for Netflix. Both
great. Clelia, you had developed some webinars too, or designed to look just show compassion by giving people information and tools and things like that.
At the beginning of COVID, even before it was claimed as a pandemic, we started by sending people home only for 2 weeks initially, which extended into 1 month. And at a certain point, we started to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? People were stressed out, asking us, are we coming back or not? How do we deal? I cannot do my work from home because the kids are driving me crazy. So all of this started to happen, and we say, okay, we have to find a way. We don't have it figured out, but we have to find a way. How can we support them? So I started to look into content with our employee assistance program vendor, and I started to find a lot of interesting content that they have. So I thought, well, there is an opportunity here. I talked to them. We developed very, very customized content for our employees, and we developed this series of webinars. One of the Aegion core values is be better, so we branded as we're going to be better throughout COVID. And we started, the first webinars were about building resilience during the pandemic, and we had one special edition dedicated to frontline workers because it was a little bit polemic how we were sending everybody's support to home while we were expecting the other half of the company to be working there in the field every day. Do we care less about them or not? How to manage, how to acknowledge those feelings, how to manage it. And then we started to move to, at the beginning, to more practical topics because we wanted to call their attention. In these oil and gas, infrastructure industries, everybody's proud to be tough. So introducing the subject of mental healthness is not easy, or it wasn't easy. Now it's easy, but back then it wasn't. So we started with practical topics, and it was about how to guide the managers on working remotely and the employees. Then, because we were going through furloughs or salary reductions, we brought a financial advisor to talk about financial stress in the household. Then the next topic was with an education advisor on homebound schooling, and from that then we jumped into mental health, and we started to talk about the importance of nutrition, good quality sleep. And I was surprised of how well received it was. At the beginning, we were even hesitant of how employees will see it, but very soon they even started to send emails suggesting topics that they wanted to talk about. And I think it was a very simple way. It was nothing fancy, and still it was very effective and well received.
Well, the mental health piece is a good segue into the thing I wanted to get to next in the time we have left, which is coaching and how it's changed. It seemed like years ago coaching was a lot about helping people meet their key performance indicators and move ahead. It was really a lot about goals and things like that, some softer skills, but now it seems like it's evolved more toward the other half of what we're talking about today too, which is how can you keep it up and stay on an even keel even while you're being ambitious. So who'd like to, I think you all have something to say about that, but sure.
So
Kristi.
for us, probably about 2 years prior to the pandemic, we have an on-site clinic. Our factory is very large, and we have about 9,000 people total in one location. So when we first moved out there about 5 years ago, we put in an on-site clinic just for primary care and chronic conditions and things of that nature. And probably about 2 years into moving into the factory, we'd consolidated 4 factories into one. And we recognized that HR was spending a great deal of time really mentoring, coaching, and just really listening, to employees that were struggling with work, struggling with home. It was almost like just the lid came off, and folks that had been stable for a long time. But there was a lot of pressure as we moved into this one factory. Well, So we had the clinic, and then about 2 years into it, we brought in a mental health counselor to help support, the employees and as well as the HR team, who was really kind of, being taking the brunt of it. And having her on site when the pandemic occurred was really helpful, but we recognized quickly we needed to shift, not only to service the thousands of factory employees that we have there every day, but how do we engage the people at home? And we were starting to hear stories about, oh, I'm really worried about Charles because, he's not engaging on Zoom anymore and he's already somewhat of a loner, so you started hearing these, or hey, we've not heard from somebody for a couple of days, and they haven't logged on, what do we do, right? And so we had to start with educating our managers on even just how to recognize, when an employee is dealing with emotional difficulties or emotional stress. And then, working with them on how to get them engaged with our counselor. And we started inviting her, or the leaders would invite her to their weekly meetings, their monthly meetings, and she would kick off their meetings. Hey, I'm Iris, and I want to remind you that this is what I'm here for, and it's confidential, and you can call me without anyone knowing. And hey, guess what? Now we've gone virtual, so I can counsel you, over a virtual situation. But then also getting her out in the factory, because you'd mentioned frontline workers, that, we had all of these folks that were coming in every day, amidst people shortages, parts shortages, increased demand, and, we were really burning out our frontline supervisors and, just really our employees. So just having that resource and recognizing that, we needed her to flex in different situations for different audiences, but really getting her engaged in every business unit and every opportunity they could, even if it's just 2 minutes. Hey, this is available. If you need it, don't forget, And we did see a lot of our participation in those services go up quite a bit in the last year.
Wow. That's dramatic. Kristi's company, as you may have heard from the beginning, is turning out air conditioners as fast as they can. The season is coming, even though it might not feel like it at the moment. Lisa and Matt, you're both involved in coaching in different ways. Would you like to tell how it's evolved?
Sure. Phenomenal effort. That just is a really inspiring story. I think one of the things that we like to talk to our leaders and really to our client partners and just anyone within the AMP community about is a little bit of the distinction in terms that we throw about the workplace, whether it be empathy or compassion. And because actually having a little bit of, words do matter, and having that understanding, I think helps people process their way of understanding their own emotional landscape and then understanding the landscape of others. So perspective taking is kind of where we start. We start by cognitively kind of like imagining what it might be like to be in someone else's shoes, and then we might move into a place of empathy, which is best understood as an emotional response. And empathy is this tremendous thing that humans have the capability of doing, but there's a real downside to empathy. And that's when I hear about burnout, or maybe just becoming numb after one tragedy after another. So that's the downside to empathy that can actually move our leaders into a place in which they're just completely ineffective. Or I've heard the term ruinous empathy is not a place
I think you mentioned empathy hijack, which is I'd never heard that term.
Absolutely. So if you think about the brain and just a little bit of neuroscience, many of us have talked about or heard about the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is that part of the brain kind of tucked beneath the prefrontal cortex here. And the amygdala is part of the limbic system, and that's where all of our emotions originate from. It's also part of our fight, flight, fright response. And it's also where empathy comes from. So just like our amygdalas can be hijacked when we hear really disturbing news and, and we're flooded with cortisol and all of these emotions surge through our bodies, the same thing can happen when you develop empathy for a coworker. You can have that same response because that's kind of what empathy means. You're not just understanding their feeling, but you're feeling it with them. And we have to be able to have that experience, understand what it is, and then step back from it. I like to use mindfulness. I like to take a mindful breath, just a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth observe what I'm feeling, to kind of bring my prefrontal cortex back online so that I can move to that next step, which is I think where we want to be, and that's the seed of compassion. So compassion literally means the desire to be of benefit, to be of help. But if we're in an amygdala or emotional or empathetic hijack, we can't be of help. So we have to understand, feel, and then step back and be of help. And that's a lot,
Yeah.
but I think it's essential.
Well, thank you. Matt, you've been coaching a long time. You've probably seen the whole trajectory of things.
Yeah, so I'll share a little story that we heard. We actually started using BetterUp in the middle of the pandemic, and it was started out about with 450 people, which is a significant number of people. And a couple weeks ago, we just actually rolled 1,000 people all receiving coaching at once, which is about 3% of our company, which is really significant. But I'll share this one story. When we rolled it out, there were some town halls where people were really frustrated. And this one woman was receiving coaching from BetterUp, and she heard this other woman on the phone being very sort of emotional and really upset and angry. Well, that woman proceeded to call this other woman that was having the trouble and said, "Hey, I just want to talk. It sounded like you're really, like she just had this incredible compassion for this person that she heard. She didn't know who she was, but she thought maybe, so she called her and was able to really just sort of, I don't know, whether it was almost like be a coach and a counselor for this woman that was really challenged. And so she said, "Hey, look, this would not have happened if I was not receiving coaching, because I was taking care of my own emotional well-being in order to take care of somebody else." And that to me is a real, I can't get that. And I can't get that feedback any other way besides someone saying, "Hey, look, this is actually a direct result of the coaching I was experiencing." So we're really
Wow.
grateful for that.
That's a great way to wrap. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate this. Of course, there were a couple other questions I gave you, but you can submit the answers in writing by the end of the week. Okay. Just kidding. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.